I'm Julia Davis, a film major who stumbled into the business world with no experience in 2006. I was able to fail enough to learn how to run a 7-figure business and have provided consulting services to over 200 individually owned companies. Through this podcast, I hope to provide some perspective on the growth and grit it takes to accomplish big goals and share some hard lessons I've had to learn along the way. Thanks so much. And thanks, Celeste, for joining us today on the Growth and Grit podcast. This is designed for entrepreneurs or anybody in the business realm looking to improve skill set or learn from mistakes that people have made. And I know you're somewhat of an expert on sales training and development, and you're a certified trainer and consultant from Gap Selling, which is really neat. And I briefly did an audio on that book to try to summarize and read it quick before our podcast to get up to speed, because Brandon was like, you have to read this.
Wow. Expletives, I'm sure that you're like, oh.
It was great. And I think it's always awesome to talk to somebody who's in the consulting field. I've been in the consulting field myself for several years, and I think it's interesting because in the consulting realm, you're kind of, it's a front, like you put in all this time and you see a big reward on the back end, but not everyone can visualize that right off the bat, which makes it a little challenging. It's like, if you change the stuff now, in 3 months, you'll see the result of it. So my first question for you is, when you go into a business, what is the first thing that you look for? Like, what is the evaluation set that you do when you walk in?
Yeah. So in formal training from a Gap Selling lens, I'm a certified Gap Selling training partner, but I'm also the certified seller for Keenan, who is the founder of Gap Selling, which means that I take every single hand raiser, anybody who books, who wants to talk about Gap Selling, it comes to me. So I get the gambit of entrepreneurs to multi-gazillion dollar businesses. We always start with 4 things: people, process, strategy, and structure. Those are the 4 things that I'm looking to assess right off the bat.
So see, people,
process, strategy, and structure. Okay. That helps us to determine, is there a need for consulting? So a lot of times people think of Gap Selling. It is the sales methodology. It's backed by a sales growth company. So the sales growth company, which is run by Keenan, and we have fractionals, will come in and do consulting on go to market, product fit. Sales training is just one piece. So sales training is where I specialize. A lot of people will say, and this is where sellers and entrepreneurs, we do this all the time. We self-diagnose ourselves. I need this. I need this. And it's not necessarily that we need it. It's what we think we need. We haven't done a root cause analysis to really determine what is wrong in our business and what is that stemming from. So I'm looking at those 4 things to determine, is training going to solve the business problems that Gap Selling solves for? Or is this really a consulting area that training is just one piece and often the last piece? So as you know, people who build a house, a lot of times women, we all have it like, oh, let's look at all the decor and we'll pick everything out. We're like way ahead of it. We need to be looking at like the foundation, what is going in the house, like what are the bones first before we do all the decorative. So same with our view on consulting and training.
What have you found is the most frequent problem?
99.9% of the conversations I have, nobody from CRO to CEO, sales leader to frontline sellers understands the unique business problems that they solve. Now, many people will tell you, oh, I understand the problems we solve. We solve for efficiency, productivity, like time to market, scaling. But quite often, those are reasons why people buy, why buyers buy. Buyers buy to solve business problems, something you can't fix. Sellers love to focus on broken process or like a missing tool. Oh, they don't have a way. They're using Excel. They don't have a way to categorize all their invoices. Oh, we solve for that. Great. They need us. Why does that matter? So I have to stop myself when people ramble on. I'm like, why does that matter? Why does that matter? And go that step further. So we always start in every business, and it's a painful exercise, especially if you've read the book, to go through what's called the problem identification chart. If you use ChatGPT, it's still going to be at the technical level because ChatGPT and AI can't discern between like a business problem and a technical problem. So that, I would say, is the biggest miss. And then you have sellers go to marketing out there talking about a lot of like technical surface level things that, yes, people will buy, but after a while they'll churn. It doesn't stay sticky. You haven't really addressed what's going on. So we spend a lot of time there. And sales methodologies, everybody will tell you like, oh, sell to pain, sell to the problem. But nobody works with you on like, what are the actual problems that you solve? And why does that matter? So that's what I find on every single call. And people always want me to tell them, well, what is the business problem I solve? I'm like, I don't know. We got to go through, this is like massive hours of brainstorming and getting go-to-market and product and CS and C-suite together to really talk and understand your buyer. So I don't know it off the bat.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think the idea of the people are like, this is my issue, but maybe it's not. Maybe that's just like a symptom of a disease, right?
It's like going to the doctor, right? All of us will come in like, oh, I have this pain or this bruise. I mean, the doctor knows enough to know the root causes of like, all right, that's really stemming from something else. You know, my husband will get hives a lot. And he's always trying to treat like the hives. I'm like, I really think it's stemming from something like really deep, right? Like an allergy or anxiety or something. And he's like, nah, it's just hives. It's just from swimming or something. I'm like, okay, keep putting that topical lotion on. When it's really coming from something deeper, doctors are really great at it. A lot of doctors, my dad's a physician, of getting to what the actual problem is. But we like to just diagnose surface level pain and go on with it. But we typically don't accept that from other people in our personal life. Like if someone tells you just put a Band-Aid on something, you're like, yeah, I think my arm is broken, and it really is broken. Band-Aid's not going to be they work for a little bit.
You mentally feel better, but overall, not going to solve the
But
problem.
I guess as moms, we do that. Band-Aids are our best friends. Like, yes, Band-Aids, yes. Give them all.
So how did you get involved in this? Like, what's the journey been like? Like, how did you get into the position that you're in?
What's funny is like I actually pay Keenan, so people like don't realize that. Like I'm in a licensing agreement, so I'm my own business. One of the products, my main products, is Gap Selling, so I pay for a licensing fee. I was in corporate America for 20-ish years and climbed the corporate ladder in hospitality sales, which is a very interesting type of sale. It's a very BANT-ish. If you don't know what BANT, it really is like checklist selling and heavy relationship selling. And climbed the corporate ladder, went up into the corporate office, had oversight of like 19 hotels, 50 salespeople, coast to coast, and was traveling all the time. A new mom at age 40. I'd had a baby. And then the pandemic hit. And a huge part of my job was recruiting. We had over 70% turnover. Hospitality is notorious for turnover. So constantly was going to LinkedIn to find people and networking. And everybody would always be like, who's on your bench? I was really great at that. And training. I did a lot of training onboarding of sellers. And so I, like many people, my position was eliminated. And I was at this fork in the road. This is like the entrepreneurial decision a lot of us have to make. Like, I feel like I'm an entrepreneur, but the safety net of having that corporate umbrella, like, which path do I go? So I chose to bet on myself, and that was late March of 2020, and started taking all the courses. And I thought, oh, I'm going to help individuals. And I quickly realized individuals don't have a lot of money, especially right after a pandemic. So then I started selling into businesses, mostly focusing on how to leverage LinkedIn as a sales tool for sellers during the post-pandemic, specifically into hospitality. And then someone in hospitality who I'm still in touch with, going to his podcast, we've done some things together, said, I think you should read this book called Gap Selling. You'd be great as a trainer. So I was like, okay, fine, I'll read it. And then I was like, oh my gosh, my 20-year career is a sham. Like, I've just been asking people what they want and giving it to them. And I didn't, I had this moment of clarity. And so I approached the team about their partner program. And in February, it's coming up on 2 years, I was like an apprentice. I went back to school and started their certification process. And 5-ish months later, became certified and then started building my business of, you know, building pipeline and social media and crying, outreach and like, yay, no, yay, no. That's dope. It's still like that. Just this morning, Keenan called me, texted me like 7:15. Hey, did you get that email? And then we're chatting about, you know, everybody wants a discount or something. And that's not really, we teach people not to do that, to sell to the gaps. I'm like, no, I know their gap. Oh, so that's where I am. And I would say entrepreneurship is harder than motherhood. I can't believe I said that, but it's true.
It is. It's like a roller coaster, right? Emotionally and physically, I feel like, some weeks, like what's your typical work week as an entrepreneur? Like right. The hours are all over the place, right? Like sometimes you're doing something at midnight, sometimes it's 6 a.m., sometimes it's a light day, sometimes you're working 20 hours. Like it's so unpredictable, right?
Totally. And the guilt that comes with trying to sacrifice or make the decision, like what is the sacrifice going to be? And a couple moments, my daughter has said something like, Mommy, put your phone away. And then I'm like, oh gosh, don't be that person. So I have to balance. Plus, is, like having kids now, it's the drop off and the pickup. And my child's school starts at 8:50. That's like not conducive to most working hours. So it's a call or two before, juggling with my husband, now taking her to school, then the afternoon pickup, and she's playing. So yeah, it's been interesting. Like tonight, I have a call with a team out of Singapore. That's at 9 p.m. So I got to be like camera ready. Can't be all like,
I'm ready for bed, like with your toothbrush in your mouth. Like, okay, let's go. Bed. I'm going to be in bed sleeping on my pillow. What's your client load currently? Like how many businesses are you currently like mentoring?
So it really depends. I try to carry 4 individual clients that could be really small businesses or individuals per quarter. That's like one-on-one coaching. But I'm a seller, so I have given myself a quota. And so I'm out there drumming up pipeline, but I also, like yesterday, I had 3 sales calls plus a lunch plus 2 internal calls. So that's a heavy day. I was like exhausted at night. And then I'm like, great, I got to get into Salesforce and update things because I have pipeline review. So I'm an active seller as well, which is this weird place to be because 4 weeks from now, I will also do some trading. One's in person, the next week's in person, the next week is virtual at night. So then I have to adjust my selling schedule. So it's nothing for us to have, like our client engagements depends. Keenan does consulting, so he's with them like 2 to 6 months. When I work with a client, we typically do training, but then we're there for retention and reinforcement. That's where the stickiness and the learning happens with sales teams. So that's 13 weeks. It's only 1 hour a week, so it's not so bad. So I would say like 4 is dual max because I also have to keep my schedule open for sales calls.
Yeah. And you really
go ahead.
You recently went into like a women's prison, right? Oh my God, that article. Can you tell me about that? Like what was that experience? Because I really got a lot out of that article, mainly because of the no distractions thing, right? Like they were so effective because they could just focus on the job for 8 hours without their phone, without social media, without things popping up. It's like amazing what can get done when you can just reach enough customers, right?
It's interesting. Someone told me about this company called Televerde in February. I often will tell Keenan, we're in a unique business model here where the more sales calls I have, the less like prospecting I can do or other partners can do. Have we thought about having someone create top of funnel for us. And he was like, I'm liking it. And I said, okay, because I have an idea. Let's trade out services potentially with this customer that loves gap selling. But here's the caveat. Most of their sellers are in prison. He was like, what? Okay, I'm listening. So long story short, hooked up with the Televerity team, and it is a very interesting concept. There's a TED Talk around it, been around for 30 years, the concept. So women, 3 different prisons. One was based in Perrysville, Arizona, right outside of Phoenix, has inmates who act as SDRs and CX, team leads, and some inside sales reps for really large companies. They have like massive companies that are very well known that you and I would know. And their their outside sales team is outside of the prisons, but most of them have come up through the program. The inside sellers show up to work every day, 40 hours a week. There's like a call center with cubicles. They're all sitting there with 2 screens. They're in Salesforce. They're on LinkedIn. It's all heavily monitored. They get amazing training. They all have a copy of Gap Selling, and then we're training the external team, but some of that team sits inside prison. But what was really interesting to me is I talk with a lot of teams that really struggle with creating top of funnel because they can't keep SDRs employed. Always a revolving door. It's a really tough job. These women stay in these roles for like 4 to 5 years in the SDR role. And it's a captive audience. We laughed like, oh, it's captive.
Because it's their stuff. Like, they can't do anything. Like, what are they going to do?
Right.
Their sentence is long, right?
They get their 30-minute lunch break, the 2 15 minutes. And outside of that, if they're not on team meetings, they're all assigned to a campaign, depending on what client they're working for. But they're on the phones 7 hours a day. 7. They all carry quota. They have to build pipeline. They have to do it in order to stay employed. It's a very high-paying job in the prison. And then the company sets them up. Has very low recidivism rate, 1.6%. And many of them have connected from me with that article of like, they're a top AE, they're a founding AE, they're a BDR. That they go on. They have a pretty wide network to go on to place a lot of these women. And many of them that I met, they're seem just like you and me, right? High educated, motivated. They just made a wrong turn, and they feel like this gives them purpose. And what was interesting to me is, looking back at my own corporate life, just how we all love technology, but the distraction that technology has caused and the lack of productivity because of the ease of access to technology, social media, people texting you, Slack, you name it, getting up and going to do something, like these women can't do that, and they don't know any differently. So for them, you're truly getting 7 hours of productivity out of them, which the results speak for themselves. I mean, there was someone that came up to me that was like they were asking us questions because we're helping to mentor them. Just like, okay, I have $800,000 quota this year. Like, I'm almost there. It's November, curious when I'm cold calling. It was interesting. And we also met someone who's like a savant, who builds all the back end dashboards and Tableau, self-taught. And many of these women are getting education, advanced degrees, masters, because they have access. And it was truly inspiring. But to hear a few of the stories, it was very much like, gosh, that could have been me in my 20s, right? I went out a couple times, had 2 drinks, got behind the wheel, like, I was, timing, whatever it is. I left and I dropped my sense of entitlement, and I thought, I know there's a lot of stigma around it, but I left feeling like some of these people are truly dedicated to creating a second act and doing something good, and feel like they have not one person had told me like I shouldn't be here and I didn't deserve the sentence I got. They owned it, and they're like, this is what I'm doing to rebuild my life and to like pay back. So it's pretty
what
cool.
Incredible. Like, they probably don't go back, and then they have all the skill to actually get a great job.
There's a foundation that will help them, because the recidivism rate like really starts to shoot up, I guess, after 60 days if you're not employed.
Mm-hmm.
But also because they're earning such a good wage, they don't get that access to that money. They get some of it for the commissary, which again was like crazy when I'm like, tell me about the inner workings. I watch all the shows. But many of these women leave with $50,000 to start a life, right? Rent, down payment, a car. So yeah, it's been the outpouring of people who have connected with me who have been in sales roles who said this changed my life and I'm the top performing AE at this company has been great. And a lot of like they're straight cold calling all day long and rejections like whatever. Like what is my alternative?
Yeah. Just keep going. Yeah. Just keep making phone calls. Okay, this is kind of in a different direction, but I just out of curiosity, like what do you do when you go into a business or a business says, hey, we need some help, and you realize the leadership is the problem? And how often is that the case?
50% of the time. It's been tough for me and I'll say in two ways. One, I've been disappointed in human beings more than I ever have when I worked in corporate. And it's because I see so much opportunity for these companies. And it puts a bad taste in my mind when leadership ends up being the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so typically that's not me directly working with leadership. It's like a middle management who has reached out or I've connected with, and they'll tell you all the tea, like everything that's happening and going on. And you're like, all right. And then when you approach senior leadership, it's like, yeah, that's not how we're going to do things. No, we're fine. Don't tell me how to do my job. I think it's an ego play. So I'd say 50% of the time it happens. A couple of times this past year, we just walk away. We say,
Yeah, what can you really do? I mean,
we're not a good fit for you. One time, we've worked with an organization where there's been issues within the sales team, and they'll stop the engagement, chat with us on the side, and then they'll make a shift. It actually just happened recently. We trained a team, and then a couple days later, they let somebody go just based on the behavior from that training. So I think those things can happen, but I would say I'm like pretty disappointed in a lot of sales leaders. Like, come on, times have changed. Like the way you've done things isn't how it's going to be. That's the one takeaway I have from corporate. I was always told, Celeste, but this isn't the way we do things. Like, well, why not? Times have changed. Like things are shifting. So that's tough, but Keenan's really bullish even this morning on the phone. He's like, Celeste, we'll walk away. I don't care. Like we're so unattached to the outcome and the money that we're not going to sacrifice our brand or ourselves if someone's not willing to change.
Yeah, that makes sense. What message would you have for, because sometimes people are really young trying to run a business, in their early 20s, mid 20s. It's the first time they've ever been and maybe they came from a more, employee type structure, and now they've been thrown into an entrepreneurial type of environment, which, is very different, where all of a sudden you can't clock out at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. You're on the clock 24 hours, and it could be a harsh wake-up call. What advice would you have for those people that are kind of in that mid-range that are trying to figure it out?
I would say, look at my watch telling me, you need to calm down. You're a little stressed. It probably because it resonates with me. Like I didn't know. I wasn't forced into entrepreneurism, but it's like that was my choice. I started to look for jobs. I was 40 years old and I realized I've been in sales, but I'm like so behind the times. I don't know what these people are talking about. Like go to market. I had to Google it. So much changes. And so I would say for me, the biggest thing that I did was I'll call it a board of directors. You typically can't afford to have coaching. It's just, you can't for the first 4 or 5 years.
And how much does it cost? Like coaching costs how much money? Like if you quantified it, like what would be the cost of coaching on average?
And the individuals I coach, they're like $4,000 or $5,000 for 12 weeks. But I would say sometimes that's on the low end. I talked to somebody yesterday who was saying, $15,000, $20,000 plus the coach takes a percentage of your sales. I was like, whoa, this is crazy. So I think you can find coaching at all different levels. My suggestion is to really hone in on finding the areas where you are weak, that's a problem, that is preventing you from getting to the next, and finding a coach very specific for that, just versus like a general coach. Someone the other day told me, like, that's great advice. I've talked to 4 coaches and no one has told me that. I was like, yeah, wow. Like a very specific coach for a very specific thing when you're first starting out. So when you're first starting out, for me, it was finding someone who was already further along on a journey than I was, and then like glomming onto that person and then being willing to coach me. So it's what I call having like a board of directors for sellers, like having your sales board of directors, finding people who understand what it's like to grow and scale. And there's a plethora of people out there who are willing to be advisors, who are, may take a cut of equity or profit or just goodwill. You don't always have to pay them. But seek those people out. And the sooner you do that and swallow the pride of you don't know what you don't know, you maybe have a great idea, but you've never been a founder before. You've never raised money. You've never had to fire someone or had to do it all yourself. Right. As an entrepreneur, I was telling someone the other day, like the skill set I wear, like, oh, now I'm a content creator. Oh, look at me in QuickBooks. And now I can run a P&L.
Just everything. Just everything across the board.
Right. And sometimes I have a hard time with like peopling because I'm like, wait, what? You don't know how to do all that? Can't talk to you.
I feel that.
So get a board, find a co-working space, find a group of people who have a diverse skill set and a lot of experience, and they will pour into you. Absolutely. There's also like SCORE, I think it is SCORE, small groups in cities where people who are retired give back their time to entrepreneurs. Like you can find anybody who will mentor you. Like there are a plethora of people out there who will do it.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. So you did another video that I watched where you were talking about effective sales conferences. And I really appreciated that because I do think that sometimes the message gets lost very quickly and you get all hyped from a sales conference and you're like, this is amazing. We got all this information. And then 48 hours later, like no one can remember anything. It does not retain. We're about to start regional meetings and things like that in different industries. Come January 1st, every business does a sales conference or a regional meeting or something like that. What are your tips? Like, how can you make those conferences better?
Yep. And some actually that I've been talking to are canceling their conferences and looking at investing that money in a different way because they do realize we've spent a lot of money for our team to get real saucy and have, some fireworks, and then what happens? So it's called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. It's a real thing where everybody gets super excited and then 7 days later, zero retainment. You want to look for this whenever you're looking at coaching, when you're buying a course. How is it delivered so that you can retain? So a lot of times we do not retain information that we hear if we aren't doing it. So if we're sitting in a lecture, it typically goes in ear, one out the other. If we're actually doing it, like in a workshop and having to flex those muscles, it's stickier. So for sales leaders or anybody who's putting on a conference, I would say get very crystal clear about like what are the behaviors and the metrics that you're trying to move or change, and then tie your training back to that. How are you going to measure that behavior and those metrics post-conference, post-training? And if the speaker, if the seller, whoever you can't bring in cannot tie that or show that, like, then you're just spending a lot of money. So I would say that get crystal clear as a board, as a leadership team about what metrics and what behavior you're trying to change. And is this really a dopamine hit, or can we actually tie metrics to that by changing behavior longer term? So typically that means if someone comes in and does like a rah-rah, you're going to need some type of workshop, some type of training, some type of hands-on learning post-training so that it is sticky and you can measure that behavior, which is why whenever anybody comes and asks us to train, we're like, yeah, the training is like just this part. It's the retention piece, the doing, the coaching. Now you recite it back. Now you role play it back. That makes people change behavior and where you actually see metrics move.
Yeah, that's great advice.
And I sat through a lot. And the ones I can remember, I physically had to do something in the workshop. I had to move around. So I teach a lot of teams on how to leverage LinkedIn, and usually like 20 to 25 sellers in a room. And they're they're constantly moving. Like every 5 to 20 minutes, they're like at a new table, they're at a flip chart, they're doing an activity. I introduce something and then they have to do it back. We do the same thing in our training as well. Introduce, and then it is everybody's on camera, but we forget how we learn. And people don't learn by just sitting in a room listening to somebody.
Yeah, it's hands-on.
Yeah.
So that was my next question, was LinkedIn, because do you think LinkedIn is the best form of social media when it comes to business professionals, as far as like, even like recruiting or networking? I mean, the other ones seem just kind of like content.
Right.
Or like LinkedIn is more like substance. Like, how do you build that up, or what tips do you have for people that might be more, TikTok Instagrammers that maybe should be on LinkedIn?
So it is about building your professional brand. So I think LinkedIn is having a little bit of an identity crisis in that video is now really popular on LinkedIn, but you'll get huge views on LinkedIn from video, but you get no engagement. So I think it's trying to figure out what it wants to be. But at the heart of it, there are 1 billion users on LinkedIn. So I always tell sellers, it is the world's largest free CRM. So when sellers tell me, like, we've called everybody, I'm like, wow, you can slice and dice LinkedIn information. So it's still a great place to be able to find anybody, to use keyword searches, to slice and dice information, just like you would in a CRM. But if you're not using it and you are hiring, you're part of a team, you're working with clients, you're client facing, your account management, your retention, you're going to be looking to scale, you're going to be looking for investors, like across any part of the journey in building a business or being part of a business, you have to have a presence these days, because we all want this like dopamine hit of, ooh, I remember that person. Ooh, I saw them somewhere. Why does that name sound familiar? And referrals are still a huge part of the way that we do business. But if nobody sees you and nobody knows you, you're just behind the 8 ball. So I always suggest people start building a personal brand. And that's tough because people think like, oh, so just on Facebook and I start posting about my life, where you have to get concrete about like who you are. And most women will tell me that like, that's icky. I don't want to dig in and try to figure out who I am and talk about myself. But if you're not talking about yourself, like nobody is. So typically, like coming up with like 4 content pillars. For me, women, I don't know why I'm out of breath. Women in sales, entrepreneurship, right? How I love talking about like sales and prospecting and networking and helping other people and kind of just like sales insights. So that's really where I stay in and around. Some hospitality in there. You're not going to see me talking like, oh, cryptocurrency, now squirrel. No, so that people, I always wear red when I show up on camera, when I'm giving an interview or on stage or speaking. And people will say like, oh, it's the lady in red. Oh, I've seen your videos. You always wear red. Those types of things that just help with that brand awareness. Because you are a marketer, whether you want to believe it or not, just like everybody's a seller.
I think it's hard to find time to do that too when you're running a business, right? Like, I feel like it's just kind of, for me personally, it just becomes like overwhelming.
It is so overwhelming. I'm not going to lie. I just talked to Keenan's marketing person, Sean, yesterday about this. I'm like, content is so hard. I shoot 10 to 15 shorts plus a long form every single month, and I'm behind. I need to do 3 today, and it is tough, but I try to make it like I used to make them 2 minutes, 1 minute, and now I'm trying to make 30 seconds. You get better as time goes on, and you find small pockets where you're like, I'm just going to make a video. And the thing is, like, after 30 days, you can repurpose that content. Like, you can use it again. You can write a new post. You can schedule your posts. Time, everybody has the same amount. It's just how we use it. But I think carving out, is this helping to tell a story, to solve a problem, to help somebody else who's further back on the journey? Then I'm going to do it. Because if not, especially if you're an entrepreneur, building pipeline is tough if you don't have a social presence.
I really value your honesty and like,
I went to prison. I tell it how it is. These.
I mean, just like your posts are funny, like you're good at marketing because like obviously you're good at selling because your first line or your second line gets somebody to start reading it, you know?
I've had, and I don't think that. So thank you. We all have imposter syndrome. I sit and tell my husband, like, I can't do this. Why? But you just look at somebody else. I look at like the Will Aitkins, who I hired Will to coach me on some cold calling earlier in the year. Will's been a friend for Gap Selling. He's writing a book with Keenan. He's a great marketer. I can study his posts. Jen Allen, same thing, to see like, how are they connecting with someone? They're not telling, right? They're not just showing. Like storytelling. They're bringing stories in huge. And so if you start to, again, learn, grow, but you just start. And a lot of my stuff flops, but which is fine. Like, it's also cathartic to build your brand. And I've had a couple people like on YouTube, this is cringe. And I'm like, yes, you and I. Acceptance back. The no's like they would have crushed me when I was in corporate. Like having corporate feedback. When Keenan tells me, Celeste, this is really an area of opportunity for you. I'm like, okay, I hear it and I'm taking it in. Whereas, years ago, I'm horrible. No, it's like gritty and you grow with it. But you're not alone. There's so many people out there. And I think that's the great part about social, especially why I love LinkedIn. There's so many women, especially, who, if you just send them a note or they make a post, and they're like, gosh, I feel that exact same way. Like, I know what you're going through. And you're like, oh, excellent. I don't feel alone. Because being an entrepreneur, if you're not at a co-working space or with a group of people, it's like, there's a lot of voices in between the 6 inches.
Yeah, and especially because you're mostly dealing with negatives, all day. It's really hard because you don't have like a positive coach or a sideline coach that's like, hey, you're doing a great job. I think you're on the right track. Look how far you've come. Look at this. Look at that. It's like you're constantly just dealing with negatives. So at the end of the day, your head is just full of like, what other problems do I need to solve? And then, you go home and there's 15 more problems to solve with your kids or whatever else. And then you get in the car and there's a snowstorm and it's like, okay.
Keenan said something. We were driving in Arizona and he was like, oh, something. I'm like, Keenan, I constantly tell myself, like, of course that would happen to me. Of course that would be there. Of course that parking spot isn't available. Like, I'm kind of just like, yeah, whatever. I can just go through life. So I do think you learn to get this like outer shell, being an entrepreneur of where it's not like personal, it's business, and separating between, I tell myself all the time, like fact or fiction. Is this a story I'm telling myself? I learned that through many years of therapy. Fact or fiction? Is this a story you're telling myself, or is it actually happening? And most of the time, it's just the story that you've told yourself.
Right. Yeah, I love that. What's the best advice you've ever gotten? Like, or a quote that maybe you think about?
I'm like a good quote person. Something that changed for me, I don't even want to say 2 years ago. It was probably like a year and a half ago, was the advice. It was almost like I was free. Or I was told, like, Celeste, detach from the outcome. I was like, and I looked back on this life and career where I'd always been attached to like how much money I made and the success. And you're always judged by your numbers and sales. And especially in hospitality, like every Tuesday a report card comes out industry wide. And you're like, oh, this is going to be the week that we're in trouble. Oh, it's like constant. And I did it when I went on 62 first dates when I was 34 years old too. Like every single one, I was like, this is the one. I know it. Like, this is going to be the guy. And I attached everything to this like outcome. And Keenan and Rachel at a Sales Growth were like, detach from the outcome. Like, I want you to stay present. I want you to stay in the moment. Like, who cares? Be there to help someone else. And now I think I've taken it to the extreme. I even told someone yesterday, like, I'm totally detached from like what happens, but I want to make sure. And he was like, oh, a CRO, right? He's probably like, you're a seller? But that has been great advice for me to stop trying to like play the end game and control the outcome and really stay present, because that's where you learn, but that's also where you show up to help other people and give advice and insights regardless of what happens. And a few people have come back to me, right? Like, hey, I remember you from years ago. I remember you didn't try to sell me. Like, I love that. I'm like, yeah, I'm like really just trying to help or understand. So detach from the outcome, especially in dating.
Worked out well for you, right? Eventually you found the one.
Yeah, and he wasn't even part of those 62 first dates, which was crazy. I'd met him 3 years prior. This is hope for all you entrepreneurs out there. You can find love at almost age 40. It's possible. Keep going.
That's good advice. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so last question. What either a practical tip someone could apply like today to improve their business, or you can pick which one, or one thing that you wish every business owner knew, which you kind of answered earlier. So you take your pick.
Practical tip.
Like something they could implement today that you're like, this, if you did this today and consistently, this could change your game.
Okay. So I have one, and if someone wants an example, I can give them an excerpt that's like a little bit long-winded that you can use. Something that I go back to, I'm going to say weekly, and 9 times out of 10, I think I've only had one where I haven't gotten an answer. It gets me an answer immediately. So oftentimes as an entrepreneur, if you're dealing with a deal, a business, somebody hasn't gotten back to you, we use an I'm confused or an I'm concerned statement. I'm about to use one after I hang up this call. Someone who's trying to get a discount. That comes from either them not feeling like they maybe don't find value. That's on them. What I have found during discovery, so your process, whether you're working with a vendor, whether you're potentially selling somebody, you're bringing on a board member, all of that information that you have up front, you want to use in the back end. So it's an I'm confused, I'm concerned statement. So we have a guide of it, but basically you're using the gap, the problem, that impact to tie them back to like why they're having this squirrel moment. And I would say ever since January, I've been using it, and only one time did someone not respond back to me. And it always gets someone to respond either like, hey, I haven't forgotten about you. No, we're on the right track. Oh, we missed something. Something's changed. But it tends to bring everything right back because you're basically calling somebody out. So it goes a little something like this, like, I'm confused. We've identified that you have a $2.1 million gap. It's stemming from XYZ, which means you're not going to make your number in 2024, 2025 is in jeopardy, and your exit is in jeopardy, and your valuation's at blah, 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 2 times instead of 5 times. Help me understand why this, for them, it's like 2K, like is basically overshadowing all of that. Because I want to hear from them, like, no, that's not the case. Something happened. There's been a wrench thrown in it. The project timeline has moved. So it's this like, I'm confused or I'm concerned, tying it back to the information that you have, not like the squirrel moment. And it works like 9 times out of 10 where you get things back on track or somebody brings new information to light that you didn't know of prior. I used it in a speaking engagement recently, and someone wrote me like a week later, like, oh my gosh, one of my reps used it and they got a deal back on track and it closed. Yeah. So like brings people back to like the reason why you started the conversation in the first place. But if you don't have that information, it's difficult.
Right.
A lot of times you just are using that, like rooting them back in the reason, the problem, the information, and tying them back to that to get out of this like squirrel moment or when they're ghosting you.
Yeah. Or just getting them back on track. I think, and that could be even used for like employee conversations, right? So like somebody has a conversation with somebody who they can see is lacking growth, and they can say like, hey, I'm confused. You said you wanted to meet this goal,
Right.
And now I'm concerned because these behaviors are not allowing you to get at, right?
Exactly. Perfect example. And it gets kind of them to separate. Like we were talking about these goals over here, and now this is like the behavior. It's not in alignment. Like, has something changed? Is something going on? And as we know, a lot of times with employees, it's outside pressures, things that are happening at home. Okay, well, that's a separate conversation, and trying to help them or get them resources to fix that so that they don't derail from this. But it usually opens up the lines of communications again. So I'm excited to use it again today.
And so how do people find you? Like if somebody is watching this and they're like, man, I want more information, or I would love to just like, do you do like calls for offices where they could pay you to do that? Like, is there Like, how do they find you?
Typically, you can find me Celeste Berke Sales on YouTube. I think I have 71 subscribers. It's like really off the chain. Um, but it's growing. All my videos, they're growing. So you can find me there. I'm also on LinkedIn, Celeste Berke, Berke with an E. And I have a link where someone can book a discovery call. I'm always happy to chat with people free. If they want more like in-depth work. Like today, I have a paid session with someone that's specifically for LinkedIn coaching and consulting. I like to do that on the side because I like to help women and help them build their brand. But like from a gap selling lens, when I'm coming in to look at either consulting or training a team of 10 plus sellers, we don't charge for diagnostic calls. Like I'm going to do a discovery and I'm going to pull apart the layers in the onion and I'm going to serve it up on a platter. And you're going to see the cost of change and cost of inaction. Whether you choose to change, that's on you. But I'm going to help you with that. That's my job. So there is a way to book on my calendar. Happy to entertain calls or just to network with individuals. I know a ton of people, so always happy to make those connections.
This is huge. I appreciate your time today, and thanks so much for doing this. I know it's going to help a ton of people. So,
I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. You have such a wealth of knowledge. Love your questions, and I think we're all out here to help support others and to let them know that they're not alone.
Not alone. That's it. Yeah, because it's a very lonely job, entrepreneurialism, because you're just kind of alone with your thoughts a lot. So,
yes,
yeah, makes sense.